Okay, thank you for joining us for another French basics lesson where we're going to cover les articles, which are a very seemingly small and minor and obvious part of speech, but are nevertheless very important and important to understand properly. So, of course, we all know a part of speech are all those things, the categories that words fall into based on their function, like adjectives are describing words, nouns are the names of things, all those kinds of things. So what kind of a part of speech are articles? Articles modify nouns in specific ways. So unlike adjectives that modify nouns by describing them, articles modify nouns by telling whether a noun is specific, unspecific, or partial. So they kind of share a little bit with adjectives in that they're describing nouns, they're paired with nouns, but they tell us information, very specific information about what kinds of nouns we're dealing with. And like adjectives and so much else in French, articles agree with the nouns that they're paired with in gender and number. So there are masculine articles, feminine articles, and plural articles. There are three types of articles we will discuss today, the three basic types. There are a couple of more floating around out there, but kind of the ones that we start with are the definite articles, indefinite articles, and partitive articles. The definite article has two uses, and they seem kind of contradictory when you look at them side by side. And the definite articles, these are like the English the. So when we discuss a specific item, we say something like, j'ai apporté le fromage que tu as demandé. I brought the cheese that you asked for. In this case, the speaker is discussing a specific cheese that was requested by whoever they're talking to. Now, you could just say, j'ai apporté le fromage, and leave off that que tu as demandé part. I just included that to make clear that we are talking about a specific cheese, but in the context of conversation, you might not always have that cue, que tu as demandé, and you'll have to still determine from context that they're speaking of specific cheese. But you could also be speaking of something in general, or as some sources put it, the idea of something. J'aime le fromage. I like cheese in general. Now notice that in English, we don't necessarily use the article the when we're talking about something general like this. Sometimes we might, sometimes we might not. If I were just to be talking about how I like cheese in general, I just say I like cheese, I like chocolate, I like books. I don't have to say I like the books, I like the cheese. But in French, you very rarely lose an article completely. So this person says that he likes cheese in general. J'aime le fromage. He likes cheese as a category. So definite article, the, referring to specific items or the general idea of items. And here is a little chart for all the different ways the definite article can be formed. Obviously, we've all seen these. We're pretty confident with these. You've got your masculine singular form, le, your feminine singular form, la, and in either case, if the following word starts with most vowels, you get an apostrophe. And the plural for all of the above is les. All right, so if there are definite articles, there are also indefinite articles. So indefinite articles refer to an unspecific noun or one or some of something. And this is some in the sense of a few of something. So you've got a category of a thing, and if you're discussing more than one, we're thinking of a few of a thing. This is almost always equivalent to the English an, or one. So we've got that. We have several different words for this. The French kind of clump it up together in one word. So tu as un chat? Do you have a cat? Not speaking of a specific cat because we're asking the question, just whether this person has any cat. So tu as un chat? Do you have a cat? And the response might be Or another conversation about cats and dogs. Mon copain a 3 chiens, mais moi j'ai un chat. So in the first example, you're asking, do you have a cat? In the second example, you might translate that as, I have one cat. It could be I have a cat or I have one cat. In this context, since you're responding to the idea that my boyfriend has 3 dogs, but I have only one cat. You can make that clear by saying, literally saying, I only have one cat. J'ai seulement un chat, or je n'ai qu'un chat. But just from context here, you can translate it either way. But that's just to show the way the indefinite article can be translated to English as a or one. And note that the plural form of the indefinite article, which we often omit in English, so again, we leave it out, whereas the French almost always include an article, refers to more than one of something countable. So there's a difference between countable and uncountable nouns, and you use the indefinite article when there's a countable quantity. So j'ai besoin des oignons. In this sense, you might have in your pantry 6 onions, and you're saying that you have need of some of them. You're not referring to all onions in the universe. You're referring to the onions in your house, and you need some of them. That can get a little bit tricky, but it kind of tracks with logic. Okay, so we've got definite and indefinite, the versus a, basically. Then we get into the partitive. Oh, sorry, first we have to look at our forms. Un, une, des. But then we look at the partitive article, and this is where things can get a little bit more interesting. The English speakers don't consider there to be such a thing as a partitive article. So that's why we don't hear so much about this in English. And so it's often completely omitted even when we have words that are equivalent to them. So a partitive article is connected to a noun when referring to a part of something and indicates that a specific amount is unknown or uncountable. So whereas the indefinite article is used for nouns where they are countable or there is a known quantity, partitive articles are used for nouns that are unknown or uncountable. We often translate this to some in the sense of a part or portion. But again, we often leave this out in English. So you might say, je voudrais de l'eau, s'il vous plaît. I would like some water, please. In English, we could just say, I would like water, please, as opposed to I would like some water, please. In French, you can't really say, je voudrais l'eau, s'il vous plaît, because what you're saying then would be, I would like all of the water that exists in the universe. And that's obviously not something that we usually need, unless you're like a supervillain or something like that. So usually you're going to be using the partitive article with things like that. Similar concept, j'ai utilisé du sucre dans mon gâteau. I used some sugar in my cake. Now here's where you run into things where it is certainly possible in this case to choose to use the partitive article or not, depending on the context. If you're simply saying, you're not referring to your list of ingredients and you're just saying that you used sugar in your cake, you are referring to all the sugar that is and you used some portion of it. If you're saying that you had a pound of sugar or 3 cups of sugar in the house and you're having a conversation with someone where the idea is to kind of convey how much sugar is left, perhaps, you might not use the partitive article in the same way. You might say that j'ai utilisé le sucre dans mon gâteau. If the context says we had 3 cups of sugar, I used all of it in this cake, so I used the sugar. So there are little wrinkles and little shades of meaning that you do have to pay attention to. But generally speaking, if you're talking about these items that are not something you think of in terms of quantity, specific quantities, it's safe to use the partitive article. So the partitive article is really formed by using the preposition de plus the the definite article, le, la, or les, and when you combine those, de plus le equals du, de plus la equals de la, and you've got to use your L apostrophe when followed by a vowel, and the plural, de plus les equals des. There are cases where the forms and use of articles may change in certain circumstances or not be what we expect. In the case of the partitive article, you often do not use it the way you would expect after an adverb. So, elle a des amis. She's got some friends. You know, friends are not necessarily something countable. We could all have potentially an infinite number of friends. So to say she's got some friends, elle a des amis, or that just could mean in English she has friends. But elle a beaucoup d'amis, she has a lot of friends. Just the way French works when you have the partitive article after an adverb like beaucoup, it returns back to the base de instead of being combined with a definite article like you normally would. So it's no longer beaucoup des amis, it's just beaucoup d'amis. Same thing after a negative statement. Il y a des chiens, there are dogs, dogs exist. Mais il n'y a pas de chiens, there are no dogs. Again, after a negative statement, you simply use de. And then a little wrinkle with the indefinite article is that with professions, this is one of those rare cases where you don't really use an article at all. In French, most of the time, the default is to, yes, use some kind of article. But when you're saying what you are as a profession, what somebody is as a profession, you leave out the indefinite article. So it is je suis médecin, not je suis un médecin. Tu es bibliothécaire, not tu es un bibliothécaire. Weird little quirk of French. Don't know why exactly. That's just the way it is. There are lots of little pesky rules and exceptions, and I will send these links to the whole group so that you can use them at your leisure. But they are some great articles from our friends at Lawless French, which I sometimes use to help create my lessons. And those YouTube videos are all Pierre, our friend Pierre, on articles. They go into greater detail and more linguistic explanation for some of this stuff than I do in just this quick overview. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube after I post it later, I will include these links in the description. So I am now going to unmute our two participants and see if there are any questions that hopefully I have not confused myself too much to answer. I think, Melise, you've muted yourself, so I won't hear you unless you unmute yourself, which is fine. Oh, there you go.
I just unmuted, yeah.
Yeah, which is very good. Do either of you have any questions, or are you kind of comfortable with the articles so far? Sounds like no questions.
No, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's funny how it's both a really simple topic, but as you could see from some of those exceptions, things that are sort of just like, you gotta get used to the way the French people do things. There's no real easy way to learn, oh, well, because of this, then this. It's just sort of like, all right, here's a little rule to memorize. And I was even researching this yesterday. I ran into a few that I didn't include here, but they were like, oh, I didn't know that. Right, great. Like there are places where you would, there's the exception where you don't use the partitive article, but then there are further exceptions that reverse the exception and then you do. So it's very confusing sometimes. But if you guys don't have any questions, I will sign off here, but I do want to thank you for joining us today. And I hope that was a fun little refresher for a second. And I will send the links to the whole group. And like I said, they'll be available when I get this posted up on YouTube.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's
You're
also really good to see the differences of the articles in French language versus English language too.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
You're very welcome.
Same here. Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Thank you, Jan and Melissa. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right.
We will
Take
do
care.
more soon.
Okay, thank you. Stay healthy.
You
I
will,
miss
you
everyone.
It's good to hear from you both.
Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.
too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.